Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we are kicking off our week dedicated to the Sons of Rogal Dorn, the Imperial Fists Chapter. You know, I've got to be honest, the Imperial Fists were always a chapter I never really cared too much about over the years. Back in the days of 2nd edition, they were really just Ultramarines painted yellow to me. However, over the course of the Horus Heresy series, with the development of Rogal and his duty upon Terra, I really found myself appreciating the Legion and future chapter all the more, the legacy he left behind. So much so that I've been really looking forward to this week, diving in and discussing the chapter more in depth. And for me, there was really only one place to begin, and that was with the Imperial Fists abandoning the throne world. So, spoiler warning to begin, as the events we're discussing today are from the Warhammer 40k novel I Am Slaughter by author Dan Abnett. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first, without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. And with that said, let's waste no time and just jump straight in. Now, if there's one thing known about the Imperial Fists, it's that they are the Sentinels of Terra. Ever since their Primarch Rogal Dorn was appointed Praetorian by the Emperor, it has fallen upon the Imperial Fists to fulfill that mandate, to perform that sacred duty. And it's a duty they performed impeccably during the Siege of Terra, alongside their brother legions, the White Scars and the Blood Angels. No matter the odds, no matter the devastation, the Sons of Rogal refused to surrender. They refused to fail. And though Rogal would leave the heresy consumed with grief, feeling he had indeed failed his father, the truth is his legion did not. The Imperium owes their lives, their gratitude, to the Praetorian and his sons. In the aftermath of the heresy, the then chapter became famously a fleet-based chapter. Its home the mobile fortress of the Phalanx. There, their ties to Terra commonly believed to be more ceremonial than anything else, a symbol of recognition for their Primarch's past. And while that may be largely true, the majority of the chapter serving actively across the Imperium, there was still always a force of the chapter remaining on Terra, no matter what. The Imperial Fists refusing to abandon the duty their Primarch was chosen for. That was until 1500 years after the heresy. The world was named Adamantua, and the Imperial Fists chapter had assembled virtually all of its might to the battle zone, over 90% of the chapter's strength, leaving only a token garrison upon the Phalanx and the ritual guard upon the throne world, one marine for each wall of the palace they manned. The threat was a xeno-species named the Chromes, swarming into Segmentum Solar in unprecedented numbers, estimated to be somewhere in the region of 88 billion. Yes, that's right, 88 billion. It may have been unheard of for a chapter to assemble in its entirety, but considering the threat, it was hard to argue against it. And in truth, Chapter Master Mirhan had been alerted, or guided to this danger, shall we say, by the Inquisition, who believed this represented a grave threat to the safety of the throne world, if not stopped here. And the Inquisition had approached Chapter Master Mirhan because the Imperial Navy were doing nothing about it, busy on a pointless campaign on the other side of the galaxy, victim to the politics and propaganda of the High Lords of Terra. They simply were not acting where they were truly needed. And so the chapter smashed into Adamantua in force, Captain Corland leading the ground assault, and the chapter master himself commanding the fleet above. The command crew and the bridge officers watched the chapter master anxiously. He was a great man, arguably the greatest warrior alive in the Imperium. His deeds and achievements were recognized on an honor roll that was the envy of all other chapter masters. He was commander of the Imperial Fists and the living embodiment of Dorn himself. But he had a temper. Oh yes, indeed. Since the latest phase of the attack had begun in the early part of the day, Mirhan had been on his feet in the ship's strategium, watching every last scrap of data as it came through from air and ground forces, and taking personal control of every tactical nuance. Defense was the Imperial Fist's greatest skill, and even in attack, the chapter's strategy was reflective and complex. Nothing was left to chance. Nothing was overextended or risked. Leave the headlong insanity of assault to the likes of the Fenrisian Wolves or the White Scars. The Imperial Fists were the Imperium's finest military technicians, and even the most fluid plans of assault were made with the same precision reserved for the indefatigable defense. It was often repeated that the Lion had once scoffed at Dorn's precision thinking, remarking that no plan ever survives contact with the enemy. To which Dorn had retorted, "Then you're not making the right plans." Indeed, Imperial Fist's methodology, the methodology that had saved Terra in its darkest hour, the methodology espoused by Rogal Dorn and inherited by Mirhan, seldom used the word plan. Mirhan prided himself on schemes of attack, whereby layers of careful, preconsidered variables could be stripped back as necessary. Every step of combat, the most chaotic and mercurial of all circumstances in the galaxy, gave way to multiple possibilities. Some warriors, especially the noble Ultramarines, reacted intuitively to such possibilities as they occurred. An Imperial Fist identified and prepared for all of them, and simply diverted to the part of the scheme that was most appropriate. This is the kind of passage I love in the lore, and for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, it's an unveiling, a moment of recognition for a hero of the Imperium, in a time largely unknown and unspoken of in the lore. So much of our focus is on the current 40k era, and if not that, then the heresy. So much of the 10,000 years in between is barely known, let alone seen. Our real knowledge of the Imperium kept to a handful of 100 years at its birth, and in its current plight. Yet here, thanks to this story, we get to recognise not only a chapter master of a first founding chapter, but a hero almost without peer. He was a great man, arguably the greatest warrior alive in the Imperium. His deeds and achievements were recognised on an honour roll that was the envy of all other chapter masters. He was commander of the Imperial Fists and the living embodiment of Dorn himself. Chapter Master Cassius Mirhan sounds like he could well be this era's Dante, the chapter master whose name is revered across the Astartes chapters, who even his peers look up to, a name of legend amongst the legends. And that living embodiment of Dorn himself, it gives you an idea of just how well respected he is, compared to the legend of his Primarch. Even Dante struggled in that regard. Here, we get the sense of a legend otherwise lost from our view of the Imperium, a clearly deserving hero. And the second thing I absolutely love about this are those comparisons to the other bloodlines. Defense was the Imperial Fist's greatest skill, and even in attack, the chapter's strategy was reflective and complex. Nothing was left to chance. Nothing was overextended or risked. Leave the headlong insanity of assault to the likes of the Fenrisian Wolves or the White Scars. This is the perfect description of Rogal Dorn, and as their Primarch, so too does it perfectly describe his sons. No, the fast-paced head-on assault of the Wolves or Scars isn't insanity, but to the Fists, it might as well be. For them, everything is meticulously planned and prepared for. As it says, nothing left to chance. It's just a completely different instinct and way of thinking, again symbolised perfectly by their Primarchs. These sallies across the walls by Jagatai during the siege, Leman Russ leaving Terra to face the Warmaster, and the fury they both caused within Rogal each time. No way better or right, just two different natures and philosophies. Now the Lion scoffing at Rogal's meticulousness. No plan ever survives contact with the enemy. Two dawns, then you're not making the right plans. A little surprising at first, as the Lion is absolutely a calculating and careful Primarch in his own right. But then, he is also a man hugely dependent on his own instincts too, reacting in the moment, that huntsman of Caliban in the forests of old. His way of war is far more direct, offense-orientated, and again that response of Rogal, the perfect encapsulation of the Primarch. Two brothers, hugely respected as commanders, possible war masters, designed as the Emperor intended. And then that last comparison to the Ultramarines, the Sons of Guilliman, a difference I'd never really considered before. The Ultramarines intuitively reacting to the different situations, whereas the Imperial Fists prepare for them, and then respond accordingly. A subtle difference to be sure, but actually a really great way to highlight the differences between them. The schooling and adaptability Guilliman instilled in his sons, and the planning and structure that Rogal instilled in his. So much packed into a few simple sentences. Yet for all the renown of Chapter Master Mirhan, for all the strength of a near fully assembled Imperial Fists Chapter, the battle against the Chromes at Adamantua became a struggle. Something was pushing the swarms of Chromes on with a desperate fury, and strange gravitational disturbances began affecting the world, upon the surface and above. And the Inquisition, monitoring Vox traffic to and from the system, began to realise the Imperial Fists would need support, and that they should have already had it in fact. That the only reason the Imperial Fists Chapter were there was due to High Lord political games and bickering. That it should have in fact been the Imperial Navy and Astra Militarum in full force. And so the inquisitorial representative to the council requested support be given to the Imperial Fists within the Adamantua system, attempting to put pressure onto the High Admiral and Lord Commander to commit their forces. However, it wouldn't work as intended. Instead, the High Lords, in particular the High Admiral of the Imperial Navy, would use the request as a political position to gain fame, ordering out the entire reserve of the Imperial Fists Chapter to go and reinforce their brethren, with barely a token force of his own navy as support. The navy gallantly letting the Imperial Fists have all the glory. And so, the Phalanx and the Throne World were emptied of the few Imperial Fists not committed at Adamantua, by direct order of the High Lords of Terra. And so for the first time in the chapter's history, for the first time since the Great Crusade itself, there was no Imperial Fists upon the walls of the Imperial Palace. Only the greatest of chapter veterans were chosen to man the wall, forsaking their names, taking up the name of the wall that was their station. And thus, it was the fault of a Marine named Daylight that showed us the conflicted reality of the situation. It was a moment, a singular moment. Daylight was going to war. Daylight was aware of the significance. He had longed for war, and felt guilty for doing so. Only the best were ever given the reward of War Brother status, but it amounted to a punishment because it took them from the zones of glory and made them live out their lives on ceremonial sentry duty in the drafty halls of the Palace of Terra. This had been his dream since he had won the status. Going back to war had been his dream. Yes, the significance was not lost on him. It was a day full of significance. It was the first time ever that War Brethren had been allowed to leave Terra and the Phalanx and go to war in support of their kind. The first time that the entire chapter had been committed at one stroke since the days of the siege, when they had been a legion still. The first time since then that a capital threat had come inside 50 warp weeks of the Terran core. Though he was a creature bred for war, Daylight was not blind to the political significance either. Attending the palace as he had done for so many years, he had watched the activities of the Senatorum and knew power play and counter agendas when he saw them. Daylight's glorious return to war and the wielding of the Imperial Fists as one unified weapon at this time of crisis were merely byproducts of Lord High Admiral Lansung's ascension. He had made himself look quite imperial by moving his forces in support of the Fists, and even more imperial by magnanimously suggesting that the Fists support and preserve their reputation. He had, in fact, facilitated everything that was happening. What a moment in the history of the Imperium here. The Imperial Fists leaving Terra. If only it could be a moment Rogal would be proud of. Unfortunately, I absolutely do not think it would be. The conflict here within Daylight is perfectly understandable. He knows what this moment means. He's a creature created entirely for war. A man genetically elevated to bring destruction to the enemies of mankind. And yet, he's had to spend his service at the safest place in the Imperium, Terra, manning the walls and corridors of the Imperium's bastion, the very heartbeat of the galaxy-spanning empire. He had longed for war, and felt guilty for doing so. He's not a soldier happy to be away from the front, given a chance to see his family one more time. This is a being almost totally removed, who thinks in a manner almost alien. He would gladly have stood sentinel upon Terra for centuries, had his duty demanded it. As to a space marine, duty is everything. It is the sole compass to guide their lives. However, his heart, as much as a marine can truly have one, yearned for war. And yet you can tell, he knows. He knows. He shouldn't really be leaving Terra at all. Daylight was not blind to the political significance either. Attending the palace as he had done for so many years, he had watched the activities of the Senatorum and knew power play and counter agendas when he saw them. Commanded by the High Lords of Terra, an Astarte in truth has no choice but to obey. In the absence of the Emperor, they are the voice of the Imperium. They are its rule. So even here, in knowing he shouldn't be leaving Terra, in knowing that it is quite clearly a propaganda move, using the symbol of a united Imperial Fists Chapter, rather than redeploying the might of the Navy as they should. A High Lord to be seen as commanding an entire chapter. A first founding chapter nonetheless. Daylight and all the other remaining Imperial Fists simply have no choice. But oh how Rogal would have made his opinion felt. How he would have seen the truth and removed the High Lords responsible. Let's be honest here, the High Lords wouldn't even have had the gall to try it if Rogal was still within the Imperium. And perhaps there's a possibility they may not have even tried were Chapter Master Mirhan the one to command. As though he had assembled the might of most of his chapter, he hadn't done so because he was ordered to. He was merely informed of the threat by the Inquisition. He knew how he had to face it, because the Militarum and Navy hadn't. And his reputation seems all but certainly of a man not to be trifled with. A man very much in his Primarch's image, who would not have put up with the High Lord's games. However, the simple truth is, he didn't know that his reserves were being ordered to leave the Phalanx and Terra entirely. That all of his chapter was being flung into this front line. That the Imperial Fist legacy was being risked for politics and nothing more. A man who, through no fault of his own, now has the legacy of being the chapter master, who forsook the vow given by Rogal Dorn himself. And he never would know, because this one action would cost the Imperial Fists everything. The High Lords of Terra had doomed the chapter and its legacy. And that is a discussion for tomorrow. But as always everyone, what do you think? Is the legacy of Chapter Master Mirhan something you'd like to see more of? Does his legendary reputation deserve some development? Is the Imperial Fists leaving Terra a big deal? Is this a monumental moment in the chapter's history? How do you feel Mirhan would have reacted were he informed that he was the chapter master who had abandoned Terra? And how do you think Rogal would have felt about it? But as always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again tomorrow as we continue our dive into Imperial Fists Week.